Hello and welcome to February and the first of our February Q&A live sessions. My name's Rebecca. I'm here to help you with any questions you might have about preparing for your test and to help you understand the best ways to prepare. And I can answer your questions live in the next 60 minutes. So if you have a question you'd like to ask, whether it's about listening, reading, writing or speaking, pop it into the chat box either on YouTube or Facebook. We're streaming live to both of our channels at Official OET. And I will answer as many questions as I can in the next hour. So it's a very simple format. If you've never been before, don't be shy. There are usually more questions than I can answer within 60 minutes. So pop your question in nice and early and I'll get to it as soon as possible. So let's get started. And I can see already a few questions waiting for me, so I will get onto those straight away. The first question is from Gibran on YouTube, who says, please can you discuss how to improve spelling mistakes in listening part A? I'm not sure if that was a little joke there, Gibran, that there is a spelling mistake in your question, but it's a helpful way for me to demonstrate how important it is for OET candidates to pay attention to their spelling. In listening part A, you are expected to be as accurate as possible with the spelling of your answers. And this is part of the reason why you're given time to check your answers at the end of the audios. So looking back at the answers you've written or typed for listening part A, making sure that the word is complete, that the word is legible. And if it is a common word, as most answers are for listening part A, really working as you prepare for your test to improve your spelling accuracy. And there are a number of things that you can do, including familiarizing yourself with common spelling rules and common spelling patterns in English, but also making a note of words that you commonly misspell and creating a list of those and sort of testing yourself on 5 or 10 of those words a week until you have locked them into your long-term memory and you're able to spell them accurately each time. It was something that we discussed during listening week last week. I'm going to copy the link to our listening week playlist, pop it into the chat now for all of you to look at after the session if you weren't able to join or you haven't yet seen those sessions yourself. In the listening part A session, but also in some of the other content, we talk about how to really work on your spelling and improve your spelling skills. So those should be interesting for you. All right, Haifa has a few questions. The first one is, can I write a paragraph on past medical history or medication? So one paragraph about the medication or one paragraph about the history. Absolutely, you can if this is sort of really important information for the reader. In some cases, I imagine there is a significant amount of past medical history that the reader needs to understand to be able to comprehend the case and to be able to continue care for the patient, in which case it could be a whole paragraph. Medication as well potentially could be a whole paragraph. I think that's less likely that there's going to be that amount of significant medication information to take a whole paragraph, but it could be. Each set of case notes is different. I can't say that something is always possible or something's never possible, but absolutely. The main thing to think about with the writing test is the reader. What is going to make it clear for the reader to understand the situation? You need to organize your letter based on what will make it clear for the reader. So if there is enough significant medical history that the reader needs to understand to be able to know how to continue care, then absolutely organize that together in a separate paragraph. Second question is about verb tenses. What verb tenses can I use when I'm writing about on today's visit? Now, this is a good chance for me to direct you to the language handbook in our OET website. So I'm just going to try sharing my screen to that slide. So Here we go. I'm sharing now to the language handbook section of the OET website. It's found under the Learn tab at the top of the page. And this contains tips on all parts of OET. And for something like today's visit, you're likely to find that either by looking under writing. So we've got specific articles related to writing, or you're likely to find it under grammar and punctuation. So what is the best tense to use for today's visit? And here you can see the article, use the correct tense to write about today's visit. So the language handbook is a really good resource. I'm going to add the link to the language handbook part of the website into the chat so that you can bookmark it. Make sure you visit it regularly because we do update with new articles based on questions that we're being asked by candidates. So it's an ongoing resource. And your last question, if the case note didn't mention that the letter is urgent, like it's a new diagnosis for cancer, is it okay if I write your urgent attention will be appreciated? So OET is not testing you on your medical judgment. You don't need to decide whether a situation is urgent or not based on your reading of the case note. So unless the case notes mention the words urgent or emergency, you can consider that the situation is standard. Not every cancer diagnosis requires an urgent referral, so it's not necessary to add that detail based on your own judgment. You can use the case notes as they have been provided. If you are supposed to consider the situation to be urgent, then that will be mentioned within the case notes. All right. The next question comes from Meru on YouTube. Please, can you guide me about study material and listening part C? So Meru, I've already given a couple of really good tips and shared links to those in the chat during the session already. So I've sent a link to our Listening Week playlist, which ran last year and was 5 separate sessions. 2 sessions were focusing on developing your general listening skills because, to be honest, to improve your score in the listening test or the reading test, you need to work on your overall general skills as well as focusing on test tips for the different parts of the test. So there are 2 sessions thinking about what are some practical suggestions, some practical ways that you can include listening into your everyday life. But also, how can you work on those skills in a practical way that's going to make a difference? And then there were 3 more sessions that focused on each part of the test. So there was a session for part A, for part B, and part C. So for listening part C and your question there specifically, I'd certainly take a look at that playlist, looking at the Monday and Friday sessions that were focusing on general listening skills, but also the Thursday session, which was specifically on part C. The language handbook also contains articles specifically about listening, some articles that will focus on listening part C, and there's an ultimate guide to each part of the listening test, including listening part C. So both of those are well worth bookmarking and taking your time to watch and read through when you have a moment. Shruti on YouTube is asking about how to do part C of reading. So reading part C, likewise, you can find in the language handbook articles to support you to improve your reading skills. We've also got a reading week playlist. So let me share that in the chat now as well. So like I was just explaining for reading, we also ran a series of 5 sessions last year, which focused on reading skills in general on the Monday and Friday sessions, and then part C of reading on the Thursday session. So lots of really good resources in that reading week playlist as well. So I would certainly recommend all of those resources. Sylvia, It's lovely to have a vet joining today. So you've got your test coming up this weekend. I hope you're going to have a great test day experience. And I hope you've been able to make use of some good resources we have available for vets, which you can find in the OET store. But both of these are available for free. So I'm just going to bring up the page and show you what I mean. So let me share my screen again. And I'm just showing you the store page. I believe it is this one. Yep, here we go. So this is the store page. You can see that I have filtered it by profession. So you can do this for your profession if you're not a vet. And it brings up all of the courses that might be of use to you. So there are some general listening and reading, writing and speaking courses. The writing and speaking aren't specifically profession specific, but something that may be of interest to you is the free taster course from our partners OET Online, which is specific to vet, sorry. And they have a taster course for each of the 12 OET professions. This intro to OET is also specifically for allied health professions, so the non-nursing and medical professions will find that of interest. It covers more content for you as well. And then there is the practice book for veterinary science. I think it's a little bit late in the day for you to order that if you're going to be taking the test this weekend. But those two could well be worth looking at for some final review and revision before then. So visiting the store, filtering by your profession is a great way to make sure you've got profession-specific resources for your particular profession. So let me link into the OET store as well in the chat for everybody to take a look. All right. The next question from Thushiyanthi on YouTube. If the writing case notes mentioned Ms., do we have to write Ms or Miss? So I know this is something quite weird, perhaps, in a way for non-native writers of English, that in the UK particularly, I would say, they specify, or there are three possible titles that a woman can have: Miss, Ms or Mrs. And women use them for different meanings. They're not always standardized, which adds to the confusion, I think. So the clearest advice I can give you is, if the patient has a title in the case notes, then you copy that title exactly as it is written. Because if you can imagine, when the patient presents at the hospital or their doctor, and they provide their contact details, that is what they have written down as their preferred title. So you just need to copy it and include it in the case notes. This is, of course, based on our usual advice that you only need to use a title with a patient who is an adult. So anyone who is 17 years or older is considered an adult patient, and then you would use their title, as I said, as it was given in the case notes. If they are 16 years or younger and considered a child, a title might be provided in the case notes to help you understand what gender the child is, but you don't have to include that title when the patient is a child. This question coming through on YouTube: during the speaking test, how shall I start my conversation if I've just examined the patient, and how do I continue with the conversation? So this again is an article we have in the language handbook that I linked to a little bit earlier. If you visit the speaking section of the language handbook, you will find an article talking about how to start the role play, and it gives you different scenarios and some different language options to help you choose what would be most appropriate. And one of them is exactly this: what to do when the role card says that you have just examined the patient. So our advice for this situation is usually to start by saying, thank you for letting me examine your foot, whatever it was that you were examining. And then you move on to task one, which might be, can you tell me more about how you injured your foot? Or I'd like to tell you what I think is causing the problem, if the first task is perhaps diagnosing the issue. So you sort of don't need any introductions. You've just been examining the patient. So thanking them for letting you examine them is a good way, and then moving straight into task one. Maria on YouTube says, if I write vomiting instead of vomited in listening part A, will that be considered correct? My advice, Maria, is that would not be considered correct. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One of the reasons is that vomiting probably doesn't fit correctly with the notes that you are completing, because the notes actually give you a lot of indication and clues as to what type of word you're listening for. Is it an adjective? Is it a verb? And also what tense you're looking for, if it is a verb, to show whether this was past or present. So you do need to pay close attention to the notes, to use the time that you have for reading before the audio starts, to consider what type of word am I looking for. And the playlist that I shared for listening week, in listening part A, I go through a whole sample test 5 from the OET website. And towards the end, I actually share some statistics that in most cases, the answers are nouns or adjectives. And in most cases, answers are single words. So there's something that you can do by looking at that sort of statistic to understand what kind of word am I looking for. And it talks in that session as well about using the notes to anticipate what you're going to be hearing. But again, you need to be careful to write down exactly what you hear in the audio. It would be quite clear if the person said vomiting or vomited, because the pronunciation is different. You need to be careful to write down what they have said. Sarah, welcome. It's nice to have somebody new here about OET. So OET is the English test for healthcare professionals who need to prove their English proficiency for migration or registration purposes. So most candidates are taking OET because they wish to register with one of the healthcare regulators or boards around the world. So nursing, doctors, dentistry, physiotherapy. We have 12 OET professions, and there are a number of very important regulators around the world who accept OET results as a pathway to migration and work in that country. So it's partly registration, it's also partly migration. Many immigration departments in governments around the world recognize OET results, the same set of OET results, you don't need to take the test twice, the same set of OET results as proof of visas, if there is an English language component to their migration process. So OET results are powerful. They allow you to choose where in the world you might like to work, and offer you some great new opportunities at the same time. The other real benefit of using OET for these purposes is everything that you do during your preparation is helping you get ready for your new career and your work in an English-speaking workplace, because it's teaching you the kinds of language you're going to need to use with your patients, with your colleagues. It's preparing you for the kinds of work that you're going to be doing, the topics that may be of use and of interest to you in your career. So it's a great way for healthcare professionals to prove their English, but also improve their English as they're doing so. So please continue listening to the session. If you've got any other questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Rahomix on YouTube says, is it necessary to paraphrase most of the case notes? Well, with the writing case notes, and this is true for any of the OET professions, obviously you are summarizing the notes into a letter for the reader. But in any set of case notes, there's going to be information that has to be copied exactly as it is given. These include the patient's personal details, names of medications, names of conditions, things like dates. These are all going to have to be copied exactly as they have been given in the case notes because those are the facts of the situation. And paraphrasing those could end up changing the meaning for the reader. But then there are other case notes, perhaps providing the background to the situation or the patient's improvement or deterioration, that you might combine together several notes into a summary of, as I say, how the patient has improved or deteriorated. And their paraphrase may be more useful and important. So I wouldn't say most of the case notes have to be paraphrased. But you are going to need to combine information, summarize it for the reader, and some of that will lead to paraphrase. Another question from Haifa who says, is it important to include articles in listening part A? Now, this is a really common question that we get from candidates. My recommendation would be to visit the listening page of the OET website. And on that page, you will find sample tests for listening. So I'm just going to grab the link for the listening page and post it into the chat. On this page, as I said, you will find sample tests for listening. Have a look at the answer keys for the 5 sample tests that are available on that page, and you will notice that if there is an article given as part of the answer, it is shown in brackets. And that means that it is optional. If you have included it in your answer, you will be marked correct. If you haven't included it in your answer, you will also be marked correct. So articles are never mandatory as part of your answer. Often the article is also given in the notes that you're using as you're listening, and they act as a kind of clue to tell you that a noun is coming and whether the noun starts with a vowel or a consonant. But if an article is said and therefore part of the answer, it will be shown in brackets. It's optional, so you don't need to worry about including it. This question from Adil, is IELTS or OET, I'm not sure what you mean by omitted, with GMC registration after doing a master's degree from Australia, the UK, or any English language countries? I think your question is, do you still need to do a language test if you have done a master's degree in an English language country for GMC registration? Adil, this isn't something I can give you advice on, and this is true for any of you who are interested in knowing what are the different registration requirements that different regulators around the world might have. Instead, I would recommend that you visit the page of our website, which is about who recognises OET. We've got a list of countries on that page of the website that I'm putting into the chat now. Sorry, that didn't copy over. Let me try that again. This page, as I said, gives you information about who recognises OET. And by visiting their websites, which are part of the listing on this page, you can understand what are their requirements, perhaps whether there are any exceptions if you have studied in an English-speaking country. And it's best to check that information from the regulator directly because it's personal to your situation, and I can't give out advice that might be true for somebody but not for somebody else. Kem on YouTube says, does using the same connectors or words lower our score? No, not necessarily, Kem. The writing test and the speaking test, where you might end up using connectors, is based on your communication to the reader. So you are demonstrating to the assessors that you are able to clearly communicate information either in writing or speaking that is going to be understood by the reader or by the patient. And that is the main focus. So the assessors are not sort of looking through your writing. They're not listening to your speaking, saying, oh, they've used the same connector 3 times. That's a problem. If the connector is the most sensible, practical connector to use to join together your ideas, absolutely use it more than once. It's about being practical and pragmatic. You are communicating information in English. So it certainly doesn't lower your score if you find you need to use a word more than once or twice in your communication for clarity. Adil had a follow-up question, which is OET valid for 2 years or 3 years? Again, this comes down to the regulator, Adil. From OET's perspective, there is no end date to the validity of your OET results, but most of the regulators do have a validity period. Often it's for 2 years, but it's definitely worth checking with the regulator what is true for them. And one more question from Adil. Is there any option to take a single part or subset of OET for medicine as is for nursing? I think you can predict what I'm going to say here. Again, it comes down to the regulator as to whether they allow single subtest sittings for medicine. My understanding is there aren't any medical regulators who allow that. They require doctors to sit and achieve the results that are required in a single sitting, so all 4 subtests together. But please do visit that page and check with the regulator you're interested in applying to specifically with those questions. Another question, this time about speaking. Could you please tell us some samples regarding empathy sentences for different situations? For example, headache, cancer, death. Now, one thing I will say before I try to answer your question is OET never uses extreme situations in the speaking test. So you would never be expected to tell the family member of a patient that the patient has died, or that you would never need to tell someone that they are about to die. We wouldn't ever use that situation because it's it's actually too difficult for a test. It could be very emotional either for you or for the interlocutor. And we're trying to just test your English proficiency without making you emotional. So, headache, yes, you absolutely might be talking to patients about headaches. Potentially, you might be talking to them about the possibility of a cancer diagnosis, but you're not going to be talking to patients about death. When it comes to showing empathy, again, I would direct you to the language handbook. The speaking section will certainly have a really good article we've written there on how to demonstrate empathy to patients. Um, a really easy option is just to say, I'm sorry. That's a way of showing empathy. But other ways of showing empathy include putting yourself essentially in the patient's shoes and saying, I would feel the same if it were me, or I can appreciate that must be really difficult for you. And an even nicer thing to do is to use some of the patient's own words. So, for example, if the patient says, I'm finding it really difficult, I've not been able to sleep properly for the last 3 months, you can reuse that word difficult and paraphrase about the not sleeping in your response. You can say, I can understand that must be really difficult. Not being able to sleep would also make me feel really uncomfortable. So that's a nice way to show empathy, sort of echoing. We call it echoing the patient's words. So saying sorry, showing understanding, and echoing the patient's words. And all of those are included in that article that you'll find within the language handbook. This question from YouTube: will the test be as hard as sample 5? Um, so in a way, the answer is yes. So the sample tests that you find on the OET website are designed to replicate the tests that you will have on your test day. They're there to help you prepare for the test. And that's why we've got 5 samples available for you in all parts of the test. Um, and it gives you an appreciation and an understanding of what is required to get the language result that the regulators are looking for. Because remember, the reason that you are trying to get a 350, a B grade, a 300, a C grade, is because that is what the regulator that you're applying to has decided is a safe level of English for you to be working with patients. So it's not hard on particular. It's there to test you and say, are you at the level that the regulator requires you to be at? Vishal on Facebook has asked another common question, and I'm really pleased to answer this question because it's always great when candidates share myths that they hear with us so that I can tell them that they are just myths. There's absolutely no truth behind them. So here's one of those myths that goes around social media. And the myth is that if you go to the test, so once a month, the test is just for doctors and nurses. Those are our most common professions. The second test in the month is for all or a larger group of OET professions, so doctors, nurses, and some of the other OET professions. So the myth is that if you go to the test that is for all the professions, it's easier than the one with just doctors and nurses. Or some people say it's the other way around. It's easier if you go to just. So the myth is not consistent, but the main point is it is just a myth. There is no evidence, there's no proof, there's no design that would suggest the test is easier. In fact, the opposite has to be true because, as I've mentioned now a few times, OET results are accepted by very important employers and regulators around the world who are focused on ensuring patient safety in their workplaces. They take the validity of your OET results very, very seriously because patient safety is, so important. So we have had to demonstrate to these regulators that anybody taking an OET test and getting a result has the same level of English as anyone else who takes OET and gets the same result, but on a different date, in a different year. They need to know, and we've had to show evidence of this, that a candidate getting a B grade in 2021 has the same proficiency in English as a candidate who got a B grade in 2023. So there's absolutely no possibility that the tests are different in difficulty from date to date. So no, this is absolutely untrue. Yahya on YouTube says, why can't we take OET at home or OET on computer in Syria? Traveling to another country is gives us pressure. Please solve the problem. Yeah, thank you for the feedback. We are still trying to work to cover more of the globe so that candidates don't need to travel far for their test. And obviously, we try to make or minimize travel as far as we can. There are some limitations to where we can safely offer tests, but we continue to work on this, and I know more test venues are being added every month. And we do look at numbers of candidates coming from particular locations. As you know, when you register for your test, you need to submit where you live and also where you're going to take the test. So we look at where candidates are coming from to take the test, and we use that information to focus on opening new test venues to make it easier for candidates. Jacinta on Facebook says, is it correct to write Mrs. Kale or Mrs. Kale without the dot? Um, So either is accepted. So adding a full stop, a period after the title is absolutely fine. But so is not including the full stop or period after the title. So you choose essentially which is your personal preference or what you're most familiar with. I would just mention you do need to capitalize the title first letter. So Mrs. should start with a capital M, but other than that, the full stop period is optional. Shani on Facebook says, how can I manage my time in reading part A? So reading part A, you have 20 questions to answer in 15 minutes. And my tips for reading part A are to complete the questions in order. The first set of questions, usually 6, 7, 8 questions, are designed to help you familiarize yourself with the contents of the four texts. So they're very simple to answer because you're only writing or clicking the letter where the information is contained. But while you're finding which of those four texts the answer is in, you're actually adding to your brain sort of bits of information about what details are found in which of the text, so that when you come on to the subsequent set of questions, your brain goes, oh, I saw something about that in text B, and so you go straight over to text B and it's quicker for you to find the answer. So certainly doing the questions in order is demonstrated to be the most efficient way of answering the questions. Secondly, the key is not to panic. So some students find it very, very stressful, of course, trying to complete reading part A under the 15 minutes time allowed. But you sort of have to just block out, ignore the time and focus on what you are doing. So definitely don't keep looking up, checking the time, sort of seeing how much time is left and panicking. Just put your head down or look at the screen if you're taking it on computer and focus on doing what you need to do. Working your way through the questions. Skip a question if you can't quickly find the answer. Skip a question, go on to the next one, come back to that question later in the end. But don't let time get the best of you. You need to control your anxiety for those 15 minutes and just believe in yourself that you can do it. Hala say, I'm very pleased that you are find the videos helpful, and I'm not going to wish you luck. I don't think you need luck to be successful in OET, but I will give you a great test day experience. If you've prepared thoroughly, if you've worked on your skills, no luck is required. You just need to go in and demonstrate your excellent English ability. So that's the main thing to think about. There are no tricks to OET. It's simply about demonstrating your English ability. So good preparation is the key to achieving anything important. It sounds like you've been preparing carefully, Hala. So I hope everything goes smoothly and you get the results that you have prepared for. Bobbin Charles on YouTube says, I have a doubt regarding writing assume today's date, 7th Feb 2024, or 7 without the TH, which is correct in the writing subtest. Both are absolutely fine, Bobbin. I think you can use either 7th February 2024 or 7 without the TH. There's no particular difference. So again, a bit like with the Mrs and the full stop afterwards, it comes down to your personal preference. Sapana on YouTube is asking why are there limited sample tests on the OET website. Sapana, there are 5 sample tests available for candidates to get a sense of what is required to pass their test. We feel that that is a good number of sample tests for a candidate who is test ready. If your skills are some way away from being test ready, taking multiple sample tests is not going to improve your language skills. It will make you very good at taking tests, but it's not going to improve your language skills sufficiently. So we recommend saving sample tests for when you are in the sort of final days and weeks of your preparation for the test. Don't use them as a way to familiarize yourself with the language skills that you need. If you need to work on improving your language skills, actually using non uh, sample test material, so just general English material, will help raise your scores more than just taking sample tests. But if you find you do need some more guidance and tips and skills, then certainly visit the OET store. There are a number of course books available in there. A new book that was published last year called OET Trainer contains 6 sample tests with guidance. So these sample tests go through the skills that you need to be successful in each part of the test. And this sort of information is going to help make a difference in your understanding of your skills and to help you develop as you work your way through the book. So uh, the point I suppose I'm trying to make is working on your English is much more effective than just taking many, many sample tests. So if you're a candidate who says the only way I can pass the test is if I can take 30 or 50 sample tests, that is actually quite misguided, because each test is completely different. You're unlikely to see the topics that you practice with on test day. So it's not like you can learn how to do a perfect sample test by taking many, many sample tests. The best way to have success in the test is to work on your general language skills and then to complete the questions on test day. Um, Zara on YouTube says, please, would you explain the template of the writing task? Now, this is another article that I mentioned earlier that you can find in the language handbook, that in fact, templates are not at all recommended for the writing test. Obviously, there are some things that will be the same in all of your letters. So you will always start with the address and the date. You will start with the greeting and the reference line. You will end the letter in a very similar way. So that as a template, yes. But the paragraphs that you write about the patient, no template, because the patient has a unique health situation. The reason that you're writing to the reader is unique. There are no set order of paragraphs, language that you can use to write about it. Um, it's not as something that can be templated. If you want to be successful in the writing test, you need to demonstrate to the assessors that you have been able to read the case notes and to write a letter that specifically meets the needs of the reader and communicates the needs of the patient to the reader effectively. So have a look at that article in the language handbook about why you need to avoid a template. And there are many other useful resources on the writing page of the OET website. There's a writing guide which talks you through all of the assessment criteria the assessors are using, and shows you examples of strong and weak performances from different candidates to help you understand why personalization is so important. Samaya Sharif on Facebook says, which speaking course is effective for pharmacists? So, Samaya, you can find teachers who are specifically offering OET for different professions from the provider page of the OET website. If you have a look at that website, you will notice that in the middle of the listing, so there's the name of the school or the teacher, and in the middle it talks about endorsed professions. And if you look for a school or teacher who's offering pharmacy, They would be someone who I would investigate a little bit further. I'd visit their website. I'd perhaps send them an email to ask them about your needs and requirements, and to offer speaking practice. So certainly have a look at our list of recommended providers. All of these providers have been trained by OET. We know that they offer high quality courses, and so you can trust them to support you with speaking or any parts of your preparation. Chaya on YouTube says, in the listening test, if I've written some words like hand washing, heartburn, headache, is it penalized? Words like hand washing, which are sometimes written separately or together, they're not universally written one way or the other, would not be penalized if they're written separately. Words like headache, though, are always written together. So you would be expected to write that together, because that is the correct spelling of the word. It's a very common word. It's always written as one word. But where the word is sometimes written separately, sometimes written together, there is a little bit more flexibility on that for sure. So Sarah, who's our new OET candidate, has come back to ask a little bit more about what's involved in the different parts of the test. So in case there are some other new candidates here in the session as well, I'll just give you a very brief overview. So obviously all of OET parts of the test are on healthcare. Listening and reading are general to all healthcare professions, so they require you to understand texts and audios that would commonly be used in the healthcare workplace by a range of healthcare professionals, so on general healthcare topics. Speaking and writing are profession specific. So that means if you are a nurse, you take nursing speaking, nursing writing. If you are a vet, you take vet speaking, vet writing. If you're a pharmacist, you take pharmacist speaking, pharmacist writing. So they are profession specific. And again, they relate specifically to types of communication that you would complete in the workplace. So if you're a nurse, the speaking and writing tests will cover nursing in some broad sense. So it's a kind of role play that would be very typical for a nurse to complete with a patient or with the family member of the patient. You may write a letter about a patient who has a very common, typical kind of health condition, such as diabetes, for example. So listening and reading are more general, speaking and writing are profession specific. And the best place to go to find a general sort of overview of what's involved in the test is the Learn page of the OET website. We've got masterclass videos that you can find there that sort of go through each part in about 20 minutes, talk to you about what's involved, how it's scored, what's the timing, how you answer questions. So I'd really recommend those for a slightly more in-depth explanation. Uh, Toyaba on YouTube says, can you please provide any online course and how much the fees for it? So the link that I just recently provided i- to our preparation partners is the best place to go and find an online course. You will see, as well as I mentioned, which professions they offer. They also, those listings include whether the school or teacher offers face-to-face learning, online learning, one-to-one learning. So you can choose based on that. I would recommend choosing two or three that you like the look at, perhaps based on their location, the professions that they offer, and look at their websites. On their websites, you'll be able to find their costs. A lot of them have free taster options for you to try it out before you purchase. So those are also a really good option as well. George on YouTube says, do you give time for the interlocutor to read the cards before we start? Some colleagues claimed that some of them weren't ready and they didn't do their role properly. So, George, before each role play starts, there are 3 minutes given to the candidate to prepare. During that time, obviously, the interlocutor also has time to prepare. But prior to the speaking test starting, all of the interlocutors are given time to read through all of the role cards that they may be using in that speaking test session to familiarize themselves with the contents of the card. Do remember, though, that the interlocutors are taking the role of a patient or the family member of a patient, and patients aren't always completely coherent. They aren't always completely prepared or fluent in what they're saying. And so the interlocutor is taking that role. They may not be able to answer completely fluently or completely without hesitation because they are unfamiliar with the healthcare situation that you're discussing as a patient would be in real life. So the interlocutor does use the language given to them on their card. But another option or another incident where they may not be as fluent is if you ask a question that isn't on the card, so they don't have a prepared answer for it, in which case, as a patient would, they are having to come up with an idea on the spur of the moment. And again, that can impact their fluency. Shalou on YouTube says, is it okay to write the number 3 instead of the word 3? If that was an answer, yes, absolutely. Numbers and digits are absolutely fine. Just scrolling ahead, because we're into the last 10 minutes of the session, just to make sure if there are any new questions coming through on a different topic that I haven't seen so far. This question from Donna on Facebook. I'd like to ask why we can't take the test that we failed rather than retaking all the tests. So Donna, this goes back to a question that somebody asked earlier, and it comes down to the decision of the regulator, I'm afraid. Some regulators have the situation where they only accept results when the candidate has taken all the subtests together. That is their choice and their decision. OET do not make those choices. Some regulators believe that the only valid sort of result is from when everything is taken at the same time. They want to see your performance on that one date, and they want to check that everything is at the level required on that one date. So I do understand your question. Unfortunately, it's not something we have any control over. It's down to what the regulators believe is valid and safe. Mustafa on YouTube says, do we need to include punctuation, essentially, is your question, with the date of birth? So do you need to include full stops between DOB and a colon before the date? So again, this is absolutely your choice. Both would be accepted. I think DOB without the full stops in between is now fairly universal. But if you were to include that punctuation, there would be no penalty from the assessors. Alexander on YouTube says, I've got B1 level of English. Is it enough to start to prepare for OET? Absolutely, it's enough to start preparing for OET, but you need to keep in mind what level of English you are aiming for. So most regulators are requiring a C1 level of English, so that's 2 levels above where you are currently now. If you are a low B1, it may be that actually to do a bit more work on your general English first would make more sense. And then once you've got to a high B1 or even a low B2, that's when really getting started on your OET preparation is going to be best and easiest for you. But you can certainly start using materials that are available for practice. So looking at the language handbook, reading about them, the different parts of the test. This is not the point, as I was mentioning earlier, to start doing all of the sample tests, because if you're a B1 level of English, you're not going to be scoring highly enough in those sample tests to get the scores required for passing at as the regulator requires. So I would save the sample tests for when you have improved your English to a point where you are B2 or low C1, and use those sample tests as sort of a final stage of your preparation. And this is a follow-up question about which date to use in the writing test. You should use the date that is provided at the top. So assume that today's date that is the date that you would use, not the date of your test. So the case notes have been written with a timeline that follows that assume today's date is. And so that's what you need to use, and you need to use the timeline from the case notes. Anud says, is it mandatory to ask the instructor for their name in the speaking test? No, it's not mandatory. You can do that during the 3 minutes preparation time if you like. You can also invent a name for the interlocutor if you want to, or depending on the roll card, it may be appropriate to start the conversation with introduction. So ask the patient for their name at the beginning, particularly if the roll card suggests this is the first time that you have met them. Bree on Facebook says, I think you need to reduce your OET fees. Don't you know that not everyone can afford your test? OET is expensive and it's hard to pass. If we'd like to enroll for a review, it's an additional cost as well. Retake is expensive. You're making a lot of money. Well, Bree, that's a very understandable opinion. Part of the reasons why we offer these live sessions, I'm offering a live session today. My colleague Shekinah will offer another Q&A live session in a couple of weeks. Every week, we're offering free sessions from our trusted partners, our all-stars, who offer 2 free preparation sessions a week to help candidates learn more about the skills that are needed for OET and to work on those skills. So we do that because we know that it's expensive to take a language test to prove your English. We also know that the best time to take a test is when you are fully prepared for it. And we know, unfortunately, that some candidates take the test before they're ready, like the candidate who was asking that they have B1 level of English. Starting to prepare when you have B1 level English is absolutely fine, but some candidates take the test when they only have B1 level of English, and we'd really rather candidates didn't do that, because we know they're going to be unsuccessful. We know that that has cost them a lot of money. So we would strongly encourage candidates instead to be realistic about their language, to take the amount of preparation that's needed to improve on their language skills, and only take OET when they're ready. We want you to be successful. We're much happier when you are successful. So that's certainly our perspective on it. All right. And that might be a good moment to mention what is coming up from our All-Star sessions in the next week. So as I just mentioned, we offer live sessions from trusted partners a couple of times a week. And we've got a session coming up this Friday with our friends at Carer Education, and they are going to be doing a session on writing, and particularly making sure that you are presenting information in a logical sequence for the reader. So that's a really good session. Coming up next Monday, Ashcroft Ashcroft Medical English, sorry, is focusing on reading Part C. I know there have been quite a lot of questions coming through today about support in reading Part C. Joan is going to be focusing on how to identify attitudes and opinions. So I'd really recommend joining those sessions live if you can, but catching the recordings, which will be available from @official OET YouTube after the session if you're not able to join live. And to let you know when the next Q&A session is coming up, my colleague Shekinah will be delivering a session in a couple of weeks' time. She is delivering live from India, but will also be at a time slot that is suitable for all of the countries that you can see on the screen now. In the meantime, if you have a preparation question that you would like to ask us, you are able to send those through via Facebook Messenger. We try to respond to all questions that are to do with preparation within a day. And if not, Shekinah will look forward to seeing you at the next Q&A session in a couple of weeks. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope those of you taking the test this weekend have a great test day experience, and we'll see you very soon. Bye for now.